Good morning. Committee will come to order. I want to thank everyone for being here today, and we want to especially thank all our witnesses for coming here to share your insights and expertise with this committee on a very timely and important subject. In April of last year, this committee heard from a panel of industry experts about how small businesses across the country are being threatened by a growing number and variety of cyber attacks. Since then, the threat to small businesses has only grown. Unfortunately, in many ways, the federal government's efforts to guard against this threat have not kept pace. This morning, the committee will look at the effects of cyber terrorism and cyber attacks on both small businesses and on the federal government. Small businesses face an increased risk because they lack the resources to protect themselves against sophisticated cyber attacks. We must make sure that the federal government is part of the solution and not adding to the problem. It's vital to both the economic and national security of this nation that the sensitive data held by federal government be safeguarded. The owners, employees, and customers of America's 28 million small businesses need to have confidence that their data is secure. I think it's fair to say that confidence has been shaken in recent years with the cyber attacks on the IRS, the State Department, OPM, and even the White House. Between foreign hackers from countries like China and Russia and domestic identity thieves, the federal government has a target on its back that seems to get larger by the day. This is why recent findings from the Government Accountability Office, GAO, on cybersecurity problems at agencies like the IRS and the SBA are so troubling to me and many other members of this committee. Just this month, the GAO reported that the IRS paid $3.1 billion in fraudulent identity theft, or IDT, tax returns. $3 billion for people filing tax forms, for example, that weren't the person who actually should be getting the credit back. When the GAO testified before this committee earlier this year, they told us that, quote, the SBA has not conducted regular reviews of its IT investments, unquote. In these scenarios, American small businesses and consumers were put at risk due to a lack of diligence by federal agencies. Just last week, I asked IRS Commissioner Koskinen about the data breach at his agency last May, which compromised the data of approximately 700,000 accounts. The Commissioner informed our committee that there are 1 million cyber attacks at the IRS every day. Think of that. 1 million cyber attacks every day at the IRS, people trying to get into files and for illicit, illegal purposes. With over 3 billion different mobile applications and $340 billion in online commercial sales last year, business transactions are moving away from the cash register and toward the smartphone. It's great to be able to order your coffee or pay your electric bill or reserve a car ride using your phone. But with this convenience comes increased exposure for both the customer and for businesses. In 2015, the average amount stolen from small businesses and small business bank accounts after a cyber attack was over $32,000. The fast pace of changes in technology means that hackers are coming up with more sophisticated methods to go after intellectual property and bank accounts and social security numbers and anything else that can be used for financial gain or a competitive edge. With all of the uncertainty facing small businesses in today's world of e-commerce, it will take vigilance by all federal agencies and the watchful eye of this committee to ensure the data of small businesses and individual Americans remain secure. We must also look for new and innovative ways to help small business protect their data for this great and growing threat. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses here this morning, and I'll now yield to the ranking member for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Technological innovations are vital to our modern economy and even more essential to the nation's small firms. In fact, small businesses are some of the savviest users of technology by using the internet to access new markets to grow and diversify. Yet for the benefits technology brings to the equation, it also creates additional challenges for business owners, consumers, developers, and vendors. As more consumers and businesses participate in e-commerce, protecting our financial information from cyber attacks is critical. Unfortunately, recent data breaches at federal agencies like the IRS and OPM compromised financial data and personal information of millions of people. Attacks like this have made it clear that weaknesses of the current cybersecurity landscape. Last year's attack on the IRS exposed over 700,000 taxpayers' accounts. And just last week, we found out a former FDIC employee breached the information of 44,000 FDIC customers. These attacks strike close to home for many of us, including small business owners. Keeping software and networks up to date with the latest cybersecurity is no longer enough. Cyber threats come in many forms, but they are devastating to both business owners and their customers. A single attack can wipe out a small business, which is why cybercrime poses severe problems for small businesses that are unprepared. Sadly, some small companies fail to recognize the value of cybersecurity as an investment until it is too late. On the other hand, small firms that do recognize the importance of such an investment often lack the resources to implement an effective security system. Just as we must strengthen private security, cybersecurity, we need to ensure federal agencies take precautions. The testimony we hear today will help us better protect the nation's small businesses from growing cyber threat. We will discuss the strengths and weaknesses of our federal initiatives and what more must be done for private and government data protection. In advance of the testimony, I want to thank all the witnesses for both your participation and insights to this very important topic. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back. And if committee members have opening statements prepared, we ask that they be submitted for the record. And I'd like to take just a moment to explain our timing and lighting system here. It's pretty simple. You get 5 minutes. The green light will come on there, and you can talk for 4 minutes. The yellow light will come on. That'll let you know you got a minute to wrap up. And then the red light will come on after a total of 5 minutes. And if you could try to stay within that, we'd greatly appreciate it. And then the members, we hold ourselves to the 5-minute rule also, and we'll ask you questions then. And I'll now like to introduce the panel. Our first witness is Richard Snow, owner of Maine Indoor Karting in Scarborough, Maine. Mr. Snow is here to provide his experience as a small business owner whose company was the victim of cyber attack. Our second witness is Kevin Dunn, Technical Vice President of NCC Group in Austin, Texas. He has over 14 years of experience as a professional security consultant. And our third witness today is Nicholas Oldum, counsel at King & Spalding in Washington, D.C. In his current role, Mr. Oldham assists clients with cybersecurity and risk management, data privacy, incident response, and internal government investigations. And we welcome you all here today. And I'd now like to yield to the ranking member to introduce the final witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Steven Makowski, the National Tax Chair and National Secretary for the National Conference of CPA Practitioners. He's also a partner at E.P. Kane and Associates, CPA LLC, where he advises individuals and small businesses on issues related to accounting, taxation, business consulting, and litigation support services. Welcome.
Thank you very much. And I would now like to recognize Mr. Snow. You're recognized for 5 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the House Small Business Committee for inviting me to testify today on the current state of cybersecurity for small companies and how phishing scams have impacted my own small business. My name is Rick Snow, and I'm the owner of Maine Indoor Karting located in Scarborough, Maine. We are an indoor entertainment venue with a go-kart track, mini golf course, arcade, and cafe. We have about 20 employees. I am pleased to be here representing the National Small Business Association, where I currently serve as a Board of Trustee member and Chair of the Environmental and Regulatory Affairs Committee. NSBA is the nation's oldest small business advocacy organization with over 65,000 members, representing every sector and industry of the U.S. economy. NSBA is a staunchly nonpartisan organization devoted solely to representing the interests of small businesses, which provide almost half of all private sector jobs to the economy. Several data breaches within the federal government, including OPM, IRS, and DoD, make it clear the government struggles to combat cyber attacks. If the government cannot protect its networks and data from cyber attacks with almost unlimited resources at its disposal, how can we expect America's small businesses to do so? 42% of NSBA members surveyed indicated that they have been the victim of cyber attack. In almost half of those attacks, there was an interruption in service. I was the victim of a phishing attack and have also had my credit card stolen 3 times. When I was phished, I received an email from my bank that there had been a suspicious attempt to gain access to my account. The email urged me to immediately log into my account and confirm that it was in fact an unauthorized attempt. The link provided in the email looked identical to the login page of my bank. Frantic that there had been a breach, I logged in, and as soon as I typed my password, I realized what had happened. I raced to the local branch of my bank to set up a new account, which took several hours. It took about a week to get the new checks and debit cards for the new account to us. Since we used the cards and checks for all our bills and local purchases for our business, I had to either use our company line of credit or my own credit cards. This is not unusual, as many small business owners often need to use their personal credit cards to support their business, especially during difficult times. The financial cost of my business paled in comparison to the delays and disruptions. My wife, who runs the day-to-day operations of our business, and her work was limited because she spent the week trying to update all of the vendors with the new account information. According to the NSBA 2015 year-end economic report, in 10% of cyber attacks, a bank account was improperly assessed. I was one of those. 2 weeks after the initial phishing attack, I logged into our new account late Friday evening, and to my horror found that my balance was 0. It was payday, and I was terrified that the paychecks that were issued that day would not clear. We are supporting a number of families, many of which live paycheck to paycheck and could not have made it without that particular payday. I quickly discovered that 3 wire transfers were made that night to 3 different bank accounts around the country, totaling $15,000. This is an ongoing threat of internet age, and it will evolve as long as the internet continues to facilitate commerce in the global economy. It is unlikely that there will be one solution. I'm sorry, I missed a page, so excuse me. Sorry. After a night of no sleep, I had to be at the bank first thing Saturday morning. I was lucky and was able to stop the wire transfers. I had to then spend another day away from work opening another account and going through the process of getting all my new cards and ordering new checks. My poor wife had to spend another week updating vendors. She spent the better part of 2 weeks away from her normal duties because of this phishing incident. My bank told me that this was a standard phishing loss and that I was lucky that I discovered it before the 48 hours had lapsed, so no money was actually stolen. My business accounts were not protected against theft the way that my personal accounts would be, so the losses would have been on my business. This attack could have ended my business if I had not been able to recover the money. Most small businesses do not have a significant cushion to absorb these type of losses, and we are no different. Losing thousands of dollars during a tough time in the economy can make a significant difference for me, my business, and my employees. As small businesses become increasingly dependent on the internet, they become a larger target for cyber criminals. These threats are very real and immediate. In fact, 94% of small business owners indicate they are concerned about being targeted by cyber attacks. For many small businesses, a cybersecurity incident could lead to an entire network being down for many days until the full extent of the problem is known and then fixed. This is an ongoing threat of the internet age, and it will evolve as long as the internet continues to facilitate commerce at the global economy. It is unlikely there will be one solution to stop the attacks. In fact, slowing and preventing these attacks will most likely require an ongoing process to identify new threats, vulnerabilities, and ultimately solutions. I urge Congress and this committee to always bear in mind the unique challenges that small businesses face and continue to include the small business community in that process. Thank you for allowing me to testify before the committee today, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have for me.
Thank you, Mr. Snow, for your testimony today, and what a scary situation. Thank you. Mr. Dunn, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Velasquez, and other esteemed members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Kevin Dunn, Technical Vice President for NCC Group. For the last 15 years, I have dedicated my career to carrying out cybersecurity attacks against private companies and government organizations. I am not a criminal, I'm a penetration tester. Through our actions in this highly specialized field, my colleagues and I determine ways to break into organizations via cyber and physical means. Specifically, we are hired to identify vulnerabilities that allow a company's security to be compromised. This exercise subsequently allows us to provide customized advice to our clients, detailing the short and long-term actions they should take to reduce their susceptibility to attack. My testimony today will focus on 4 areas: the strengths and weakness of cybersecurity training, increasing security when using cloud service providers, the potential impact of small business security on the government, and the benefits of a data-driven risk model. To evaluate the state of high-level cybersecurity training designed for small businesses, I'd like to explore 2 examples: training provided by the U.S. Small Business Administration and training provided by the Federal Communications Commission. Through these trainings, small businesses are able to gain awareness of important cybersecurity threats, such as the dangers associated with phishing emails, malicious websites, malware, ransomware, and the typical motivations of attackers. This information provides an ample start for educating small businesses in a general awareness capacity and extends to providing cybersecurity tips for the major areas of concern. However, the training and guidelines are high-level in nature and lack the depth of information needed to convert directly into hands-on actions. In the world of small business IT support, where efforts are typically coordinated by owner-operators, this information may not be comprehensive enough to make a worthwhile difference beyond providing general education. Many small businesses use cloud service providers to implement important services like email, file storage, and data backup. This often unburdens the IT administration overhead from small business owner-operators or small businesses with a 1- or 2-person IT team. The use of third-party cloud service providers is typically a positive security move for small businesses. The attention to security from the major providers in this space affords a number of features that greatly increase the security of data for a small business. However, it should be noted that there are additional features that should be enabled to make attacks harder for adversaries. These features are often not enabled by default. Chief among these is the use of multi-factor authentication. The majority of major online services now support the use of multi-factor authentication, using at least SMS messages to a cell phone as a means of out-of-band authentication. But despite this inexpensive option, it is often overlooked by organizations that use cloud services or internet services, relying instead on single-factor authentication in the form of usernames and passwords. The impact of a small business on the government should be considered in at least 2 key ways. The first concerns the direct and indirect connectivity between a small business and a government network. The second concerns small businesses in the government supply chain. A small business with a direct connection to a government network is likely a rare occurrence, but in such a scenario, if the small business is compromised sufficiently, an attacker's ability to traverse to a government network could be a simple task. However, examples of indirect connectivity are more common and are typically data-based in nature. When government users consume the services of a small business, their usernames, passwords, personal information, and other data could be used in a subsequent attack against government systems, if extracted from a compromised small business system. And of course, the reverse is true as well. The second area to consider is when a small business is in some way part of the supply chain to a government department or agency. The most typical examples of this are where a small business develops software or hardware that is subsequently installed on government networks. Finally, a good way to think about security and a means to ensure that the approaches chosen to secure your organization are fit for purpose is to think first about the data you care about. Considering the data first is an excellent approach and one that is advised in the FCC's Small Business Cyber Planner tool. However, too few organizations actually consider their data or subsequently plan security around the value of different data types. Even fewer organizations consider what will happen when, not if, an attacker gains access to their data. Using a data-centric risk management model will allow small businesses to focus their security attention where they need it most. Thank you again for this opportunity to address this committee. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Oldum, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of this committee, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to appear before you today. I've been involved in cyber issues for many years as a former federal prosecutor at the U.S. Department of Justice and now as an attorney at King & Spalding. In my practice, I counsel clients, both large and small, on cybersecurity risk management. Our interconnectivity is growing at an astonishing rate. This interconnectivity, especially the Internet of Things, holds tremendous promise for consumers and companies. It also creates new challenges in terms of cybersecurity because anything connected to the internet can be hacked. Cyber attacks cost businesses billions of dollars every year as a result. Where do small businesses fit into this landscape? The interconnected world lets small businesses develop new products and services and compete across the globe. But with cybersecurity, small businesses often get burned at both ends. They are less likely to have the resources to prevent breaches and also may have fewer resources to respond to those breaches. It can be difficult for small businesses to find the right information and training, and the cost of mitigation measures in response can significantly impact a small business's bottom line. As a lawyer, I do not manage corporate networks. I do not conduct vulnerability testing. Rather, I believe that cybersecurity is much a people and a process issue as it is a technical issue. I focus on the people and process side of the equation, addressing the legal and business cybersecurity risks faced by companies. I also help manage companies comply with their legal obligations, interact with various regulators, and respond to regulatory enforcement actions and litigation. These legal and business costs, including compliance costs, drain on employee morale and time, and reputational damage can be significant. There are at least 3 ways that government can play a role in lowering these costs. First, by addressing the cybersecurity education gap. When weighing the costs and benefits of enhancing their cybersecurity, companies may find that it is far more expensive to not implement basic security measures. The problem here is that there is a cybersecurity education gap. Small businesses may not find the information they need to properly assess and mitigate these costs. Bridging this education gap can be difficult for small businesses, especially those that lack the resources to hire specialized employees or cybersecurity experts. Even when information is available online, it is often difficult to find, rarely updated, and often inadequate. In many ways, cyber threats have analogs to traditional crime. In the traditional crime scenarios, small businesses would likely call the local police department for best practices in preventing and responding to crime. In the digital crime scenarios, there is no one logical place to call. The government may have a role in bridging the cybersecurity education gap by encouraging the development of cybersecurity education resources and connecting them to those who need them in the private sector. Second, many of the cybersecurity initiatives receiving the most attention are not necessarily tailored to small businesses. For example, the NIST cybersecurity framework is emerging as a leader, which is a promising development. This could simplify the landscape for small and large businesses alike. The current iteration of the NIST framework, however, is not particularly geared toward small businesses. It can be difficult and expensive to understand and implement regardless of business size. And until it is better tailored to small businesses, for some of them, it may just be one more program that they cannot afford to keep up with. Perhaps more importantly, a small business might become subject to a cybersecurity framework by virtue of its contractual relationships. In this case, the small business might inadvertently expose itself to significant liabilities and cyber risks. While good cyber hygiene is important, to improve the NIST framework and similar programs and policies, the government should make serious effort to increase the involvement of small business owners in all phases of the legislative and rulemaking process. Third, the current regulatory regime for cybersecurity presents additional difficulties for small businesses, who will inevitably struggle to determine both what cybersecurity measures they are required to meet, and when a breach or attack does occur, what procedures the law requires them to follow. There are currently 51 different state or territory data breach notification laws, and many of them are inconsistent with each other. I have seen a growing number of federal agencies also stepping into this space. In short, there is a need to clarify and simplify what companies must do. Because of the complicated and evolving landscape, the on-the-ground expertise of the private sector must necessarily play an important role in these efforts. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Makowski, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Steven Makowski, a partner with E.P. Kane & Associates, the Executive Vice President of NCPAP, the National Conference of CPA Practitioners, and a member of the AICPA. NCPAP has been at the forefront of identity theft issues through our advocacy and testimony at prior hearings dealing with ID theft. NCPAP members have helped guide numerous clients who have been victims of identity theft. ID theft has been growing exponentially for years. It seems that no matter what controls are put in place, criminals have better and more focused resources to circumvent these safeguards. The IRS reminds practitioners that they must be vigilant with their system integrity. Criminals are aware that the prize for breaching tax practitioner systems could yield not only names and Social Security numbers, but also several years of earnings, as well as bank information and dates of birth. 2 Midwestern firms were compromised this tax season and had fraudulent returns submitted by utilizing their electronic filing identification number, or EFIN. While firms are required to obtain an EFIN from the IRS to electronically file tax returns, paid preparers are required to use a practitioner tax identification number, or PTIN. Firm information, including their employer identification number, however, still appears on their tax return. Given the risk of firm ID theft, why has the IRS not adopted a firm PTIN, something that NCPAP strongly recommends? Over the past year, as noted by the other panelists, the IRS has had multiple system breaches. First, the IRS online transcript program, Get Transcript, was compromised in May 2015. The number of accounts affected now exceeds 700,000. The second breach was related to the IP PIN retrieval tool that was contained on the IRS website and is more troubling. The taxpayers who have IP PINs have already been victims of tax refund fraud and obtained the 6-digit IP PIN to prevent further unauthorized account access or tax filings. This tool had been used using the same interface as Get Transcript, but had remained available to the public and, unfortunately, those less scrupulous. Social Security uses a banking pre-note to verify the accuracy of the recipient's banking information prior to the initial payment. Unfortunately, the IRS refund system does not include pre-note account verification. The implementation of a pre-note system could result in a significant reduction of the annual $3.1 billion misappropriation of government funds. While it is easy to understand that taxpayers want to receive their refunds as quickly as possible, one must ask a simple question. Is paying a tax refund in 7 to 10 days prudent? A recent survey by Princeton Research Group noted that 22% of taxpayers surveyed would be willing to wait up to 6 to 8 weeks to receive their refund if they knew it would combat identity theft. Taxpayers are urged to protect their personal data, but with widespread internet usage, online shopping, and criminals just waiting to pounce on unsuspecting victims, ID theft continues to grow. Individuals and businesses remain the target of cyber attacks and must remain cautious when opening emails with attachments, visiting web pages, or simply paying for the family groceries. Taxpayers often do not realize they've been a victim of tax-related ID theft until their electronically filed tax returns gets rejected. Once a taxpayer has been victimized, they expect to obtain an IP PIN from the IRS, and starting in January 2017, they automatically will. In conclusion, NCPAP feels that using the pre-note technology that already exists and is used throughout the financial industry would allow taxpayers to continue receiving their refunds promptly while reducing refund fraud. Further, NCPAP urges Congress to pass legislation to provide the IRS the necessary authority to regulate all tax preparers and require paid preparers to meet minimum standards. Currently, only CPAs, EAs, and attorneys are subject to the requirements of IRS Circular 230. Finally, NCPAP calls on Congress to provide the necessary funding for the IRS to continually monitor, modernize, and upgrade their systems to minimize and eliminate data security breaches. The first step would be Congress reauthorizing streamlined critical pay authority to allow the IRS to secure top IT talent without a 3 to 6 month waiting period. Thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate the testimony of all the witnesses here this morning. It was excellent. Mr. Snow, first let me apologize to you for having to return a call there before your testimony. I apologize for that, but I had your written statement ahead of time, so I'm prepared. You experienced a worst-case scenario for a small business cyber theft. What advice would you give to others who are put in the same or similar situation?
Well, the first thing I would do is to ensure that when you look at the website at the top, the web ID, that there is an HTTPS ID, and that would have prevented that from happening. I just learned that in that process. But it would be very difficult to stop someone from just accessing the way it was with me, because it was an identical website to the bank website. So the login looked identical. In fact, there was no difference. What was more disconcerting to me was the fact that they stole the new account number. And to this day, no one understands how that happened, how they were able to access a brand new account opened with all that information and move money out of the new account, not the old account.
How long did it take you to straighten all this out?
Well, the whole process was about a month because it took, the first time we have to rush everything because they have to print new checks and new credit cards and everything. So it was about a week and a half. And then when we discovered the loss, it was 2 weeks later. And then we had another a week and a half or so of additional time to go through that whole process again.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dunn, in your testimony, you provided the example of using text message authentication as an inexpensive use of multi-factor authentication. Are there other inexpensive steps the federal government or small businesses could make in order to verify accounts?
Yes, I think that you can use email. I think there are a number of channels that you can use. The situation really is that when you rely on just one thing, in perhaps this case as well, just a username and password, that's a single point of failure. So I think the point is to have more than one authenticating factor. And a number of things could do that, so long as it's out of band from the process.
Thank you very much. Mr. Oldham, protecting the privacy and civil liberties of Americans is obviously an important component of cybersecurity discussions. What effort is the private sector making to protect consumers in this area?
Well, I think one of the key goals is transparency, communicating to consumers what information is being collected and how is it being used. And I think that's becoming even more important as the ecosystem is growing so that everything is connected, multiple third parties and the like, and a third party would include, for instance, sharing information with the government. And so I think the most critical step the private sector is taking is ensuring that there's this transparency.
Thank you very much. Mr. Makowski, in your testimony, you gave a firsthand account of how a tax preparer dealt with confusion and delays with the IRS in response to a data breach. What would you recommend to the IRS for future responses to a tax preparer once a breach has been confirmed?
That's a very good question, Mr. Chairman, and that's actually what I would recommend. First of all, is that I have reached out to my contacts that I deal with through some of my committees at the IRS, and it's being addressed tomorrow at a monthly meeting. But in addition, I would advise practitioners to know who their local stakeholder liaisons are, so they have an area that they could reach out to so that they can start the process of communicating with the IRS when they suspect there may be a breach, not once they actually confirm, because during that period of time, if their EFIN was being used improperly, the IRS could have stepped in very quickly, disabled their EFIN, and could have potentially stopped fraudulent returns from being processed.
Okay, thank you. Let me give you another question. You mentioned a recent audit where 6 of 13 e-filing sites failed to take steps to help protect consumers from fraudulent and malicious emails. What recommendations would you offer these sites in order to improve their cybersecurity?
That's also a very interesting question. I believe that's probably one that Mr. Dunn could probably help with as far as the cybersecurity aspect. But they would certainly need to ensure that as they're going through their systems, that they are making sure that any incoming emails are being checked. There's been widespread spoofing of not only phone calls as well as emails coming into companies that are purporting themselves to be high-level individuals within a company asking for data that they would normally be asking for, such as W-2s and such, that everything looks to be coming from that individual, everything looks the same, just the email address may be slightly different or just something a little bit off. And so companies really need to be vigilant as to looking at who emails are coming in from, and if they're not sure if it's legitimate or not, they should pick up the phone and call the person who they're actually getting this request from. Simply responding to that email, you're responding back to the criminal, and of course they're going to say, oh yeah, I'm so-and-so, and yeah, I need to get this information to finalize a report for the board. And they're further spoofing, and so they just need to be careful when they're responding, and as Mr. Snow had mentioned, making sure that any websites they go into do have the HTTPS that would mean that it's a secured website.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dunn, I would follow Mr. Mankowski's advice, except that I'm out of time, and I like to hold myself to the same rules I do everybody else. So I will yield back my time, and the gentlelady, ranking member, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Makowski, last week we had the commissioner of the IRS here testifying before our committee, and he talked about the cybersecurity summit between the IRS and tax practitioners. From the industry perspective, do you believe this partnership is effective at preventing tax fraud?
I think it's a very good first step, and they've already shown that it's been successful. They've met with, and they've included in initially people from state association, state government, as well as banking and software community to work on trying to prevent tax returns at the onset when they're being processed into the IRS system. They've gone and they've expanded their focus now to start including practitioners into their groups. And they're estimating that last year, with the first year of their summit, they prevented in excess of 3 million fraudulent returns from getting into the system. And now they just need to understand that returns are unfortunately getting through the filters. So now they need to keep working on filters during the processing and primarily protecting the refunds, because that is taxpayer dollars and as well as government funds that are being misappropriated.
Thank you. Mr. Snow, I am concerned that typically small business owners view an investment as a way to increase revenues. Yet, with cybersecurity, they are expected to make an investment in order to prevent revenue losses. So I just would like to hear, is it often hard to persuade small firms to spend money without seeing an immediate return? What needs to be done to bridge this gap?
I think the number one issue that we have as a small business is that every single thing leads to the bottom line. So every decision you make adds a cost. So in our case, we've added insurance, cybersecurity insurance, to our overall cost. The unfortunate part of that is the deductible is very high. So it's a $5,000 deductible. So for me, I'm out that immediately. That's the same as my burglary insurance as well. So when we have someone break into our building, which happened a few months ago, and they destroyed our security system, it cost us $5,000, which is also our deductible. So we're out that money. Yeah. And that happened to be all the revenues that we had for that particular month. So it really eats into our bottom line. Okay. It's very expensive.
Mr. Dunn, in your estimation, how much would it cost a company, a small company, one with fewer than 250 employees, to become cyber safe?
Well, I think it's very hard to provide that estimation because it really depends on the data that they hold, the types of inputs and communication channels they have. We could be talking about a very simple setup, or we could be talking about a very complicated setup. I think that it's true that the cybersecurity industry has a certain price point that currently is very difficult for small business owners to take part in. So, you know, certainly we're probably talking thousands of dollars in order to get consultative help.
Thank you. Mr. Oldum, who do you think is best situated to handle cybersecurity threats, the federal government or private industry? Or do you think some sort of balanced public-private partnership is needed to properly address cybersecurity needs?
So I think the balanced public-private partnership is the key. This industry is evolving so rapidly, and when the government gets involved, it becomes very static. And so I think it's important to make sure the private sector has a huge input, and that's why I think something like the NIST framework is a great start, because it's voluntary. It attempts to coalesce the best standards that are out there, but it's also something that has a recognition that it needs to evolve over time. My worry is tipping the scale one side or the other will cause the current industry to stagnate more.
What type of recommendations would you offer for encouraging that type of partnership?
So I think, number one, supporting NIST's efforts and what they're doing. Right now, NIST has put out a framework. It has had some widespread success, but also quite a bit of criticism from industry. They held a workshop in the last month where they heard from several sectors of the industry, including small business, that it's not really approachable and useful. Just as a big picture, the NIST framework was designed for critical infrastructure, so it's not approachable for small businesses. Ensuring that the NIST is putting the appropriate emphasis on adapting itself to particular market sizes and industries.
The gentlelady's
Thank you.
time's expired. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New York, Mr. Gibson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity here today to hear from the panelists illuminating testimony provided. Mr. Snow, I want to begin with you. Just a point of clarification. In telling us about what had happened to you, you had made a comment that, fortunately, within 48 hours, you were able to take action. And what was implied in your statement is we have a differentiation between business and personal liability or accounts. And so I'm just looking for clarification. Is that some dimension of FDIC that protects people, or why is it different? If you could just help me understand that, number one.
Well, number one, I don't know the exact ramifications. My understanding was because it was a wire transfer, there's a 48-hour time that it runs. So if you can stop it within that time frame, the money does not actually transfer, or they can call it back, the bank, with the interbank processes.
Do any other panelists know the answer for that? I mean, why is it that business doesn't seem to have the same protection as an individual? One of my constituents out there, if somebody was to do a fishing expedition on them, and they would be under similar circumstances. I'm just curious if anybody knows the answer for that. Okay, for the committee, I mean, I think that's something probably we were checking into. Concerning situation. I'm glad it worked out okay for you there. And then, Mr. Oldum, even though I know that it was Mr. Snow, it was very burdensome and onerous on your bottom line based on how you had to divert resources. Mr. Oldman, what are your comments? You talked about that the federal government might want to look at clarification or clarity in terms of what companies must do when these circumstances happen, reporting requirements and the like. What is your understanding of what the SBA requires now with regard to, or the United States government, in terms of a protocol when a company faces an attack?
So I'm not aware of anything from the SBA, but the notification requirements at large are a hodgepodge. If it involves financial information, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act would require notification. If it's healthcare information, regulations under HIPAA would require notification. Each of the state data breach laws have different definitions. And I think one of the key concerns, especially if you're a small business and you may have information involving people from multiple jurisdictions or multiple types of information, there's an enormous cost of just figuring out what you have to do at the beginning.
I appreciate that comment, and in fact, it mirrors some of my experiences in the U.S. military. So I think that's also worthwhile for the committee to capture there, that maybe we should consider a clearinghouse requirement that really socializes, if you will, what companies must do under these circumstances. And finally, for the panel, I just would love to hear your insights on this question, that with regard to science and technology, research and development, sort of blue sky, if you will, what do you think, based on your experiences, it would be a worthwhile endeavor to address the issue of cyber attack on writ large, on businesses, on people, on government, on where you think, based on your experiences, we should put emphasis on for science and technology, research and development to protect?
Well, I think in most cases, every incident I've ever been involved with, the visibility of what's actually happening from a data and packet level is never where it needs to be. So I would definitely like to see strides in that direction, some way of increasing the ability for us to understand from a network and data perspective what has happened in a given scenario.
Thank you.
I think the most frustrating thing for me was to realize that someone at the receiving end of that money was going to show up and get that money, and that there was no action taken. On my private credit card thefts, purchases were actually made. The merchant was out of that merchandise. Obviously, they got the money for that merchandise, but we absorb it as all of the consumers in the overall doing business. There's no authority out trying to stop these people that I knew of, trying to catch these people who are making these purchases with fraudulent credit cards or other things. That's a frustration that I have, in that I know that I can call my local police when they break into my building. If I walk into a bank and demand money, I'll be, with the FBI, will be chasing me forever. But in this case, there's really no action that's done beyond what we had to do as individual business owners.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired. I wonder if maybe science and technology, research and development into biometrics as a possibility, as a surety for any kind of transaction is worth our endeavors. But I thank the chairman for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. The gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, who's the ranking member of the Investigations, Oversight, and Regulation Subcommittee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member Velasquez, for hosting this hearing. Some of you've mentioned the importance of education and training in cybersecurity. I'm a longtime educator, very interested in what we can do there. But the federal government is involved in this in a number of ways. For example, last year, the Obama administration announced a new cybersecurity consortium consisting of 13 historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, 2 national labs, and a K-12 school district. The goal is to create a sustainable pipeline of students focused on cybersecurity. So my question to any of you is the federal government doing enough to provide the kinds of expertise that small businesses need to ensure their cybersecurity? And if you could speak to maybe some relationships between educating students beyond this point.
Ms. Adams, I'll start the discussion. I believe that from a tax standpoint, the amount of education really starts from the government, from the IRS. The practitioners were continually discussing this with our clients, that the IRS, with these different phishing phone calls and email scams, that the IRS currently isn't phone calling or emailing people. So if they get any of these calls, they should hang up. If they get an email that says it's from the IRS, that they have an extra refund, just delete it, because they're not going to be authentic. But every day during tax season, it seemed my office was getting a phone call, either from someone who received the phone call that they were getting ready to get arrested. My partner in my firm had gotten a similar phone call. We actually had a little bit of fun with the people. I just kind of strung them along for a little bit. And then, but as times are changing with the rules that were passed recently with collections within the IRS, some of that, as the collections get outsourced, the companies that are going to be taking over will be calling and could potentially be emailing our clients. So it's going to create an even greater disparity of the education, because what we've been telling our clients for years, come whatever point that the IRS is able to implement that process, everything we've worked on and gained with our clients over the last few years will pretty much be thrown out if they start getting phone calls from a collection for old tax balances. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Oldum?
I think there are 2 separate issues. Both are very important. One is educating students as they come up about cybersecurity. That's critical. Just like educating people how to balance their checkbook to keep good financial sense, teaching people good cyber hygiene is going to be imperative for minimizing the cyber threats in the future. Today, educating small businesses can be more challenging because they haven't had that years of education, such as a secondary student. However, I think the biggest issue that I see is there isn't a lot of helpful information out there that's practical and granular for small businesses. In fact, in preparation for my testimony today, I searched around the internet looking for small business guides and was surprised that in many locations, including on government websites, the links were broken, the guides were out of date, or the guides were so high level that I don't know how an owner-operator without IT security background would be able to implement security measures based on those guides.
Okay. Well, let me move on to another question. Online marketplaces such as eBay have given small businesses greater access to suppliers and customers abroad. A McKinsey Global Institute study found that 97% of U.S. small to medium-sized businesses on eBay engage in export to other countries. My question is, do these marketplaces and international transactions expose small businesses to greater cybersecurity risk? Mr. Dunn, if you want to answer that.
I mean, I think the websites themselves and the online marketplaces do have to be vetted, do have to be verified to understand if they have any security flaws. Because, you know, having a security flaw in a marketplace like that will expose the vendor and the small business to potential attacks. So understanding if there are any flaws in that marketplace is really critical.
Okay. Quickly, Mr. Dunn, you talked about the use of cloud computing. What's the best way that small businesses could benefit from using cloud providers to improve their security?
I think not doing conventional IT in-house is a good move. So using email and file storage from a cloud service provider will be beneficial because it's not on premises, and typically the major providers of those services are doing a lot in security and more than a small business could do.
Thank you. I'm out of time, Mr. Chair. You're back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Kelly, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank each of you witnesses for your insight here today. First of all, I'd just like to echo what the gentleman from New York, Mr. Gibson, said. I think it's important for us as a committee to find out if there are different rules for persons and small businesses and then large corporations to make sure that we're protecting each of those in an appropriate manner. Second, Mr. Snow, travesty what happened to you, but that story is repeated over and over again across this nation. As a former district attorney, I can tell you that there's a lot of room that we can improve in this. Do you have any specific areas that you think the Small Business Committee or the Small Business Administration can help to either educate or inform the general public and small business users that we can take forward?
Thank you. I believe that education is probably the key. Obviously, cost is another big concern for every small business. When you start a business, capital is usually at a premium. And when you sit down, in my case, I have close to 70,000 members who come in and race at my track throughout the time we've been open. And so I have their data, and it's in a server that I have to protect. That's a concern. My software is provided by a Belgium-based software company, so I have to have access to them. They come in at night to update and upgrade the system on a regular basis. So in an international marketplace that we're in, I think education is very important so that the small business understands. The other issue is the liability is significant, and a lot of small businesses don't understand that. When I sat down with my insurance agent to renew our insurance, that was one of the questions I asked. And I was amazed, number one, at the cost to get the coverage, but number two, how few businesses actually apply and get that coverage. So it can be very expensive for a small business.
And then, Mr. Oldum, going back, as I said, first of all, thank you for your service as a prosecutor. I think they're some of the most important people enforcing this law, and being a former one, I'm obviously biased in that. But I thank you for your service. But as a former district attorney, I was on the local level, or I was on the state level, and you as a federal prosecutor, quite commonly what I saw is that, number one, when small businesses or individuals are victimized, they don't know who, how, what they need to report. The second thing that I saw is quite often the jurisdictions are not clear. It's not clear where it's coming from, and they don't inform other jurisdictions. So they don't know if it's federal, they don't know if it's state, they don't know if it's county, they don't know if it's the next state over. And it's outside the jurisdiction of this, but I think it's important that we inform law enforcement on how to deal with this and small businesses on how to inform law enforcement so there's a database so we stop this. Do you have any ideas in that area?
Yeah, I would say generally the jurisdiction issue is a major issue in prosecuting cybercrime cases. The resources are not there at the local level, and it's hard to chase criminal information that is as wide as the web, and tracks lead everywhere in the world. I think going back to the education point from earlier, training local law enforcement who are going to get the calls from businesses that have been breached on who to report to, who's the right person in the federal government who could help, or where is this database, as you mentioned, would be incredibly helpful in order to make sure the information is not just coming in for prosecution, but also going out to help the small businesses around the country.
And kind of on that same line, quite often, these people who take advantage of small businesses or individuals move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and there's not any database that gets us ahead of the curve. Quite commonly, they use the same scheme. From Mississippi, they'll move to Alabama, they'll move to Tennessee, they'll move to New York City, but they continue to do that. Are you aware of any federal database which keeps up with ongoing scams, especially those which are quite frequently the same group or persons or organizations that are doing the scams?
I am not. In my role now in advising private companies, I know we call the local law enforcement, usually at the federal level, to report information, and we rely on them to come back to us with whatever information, but not with a lot of visibility of what's going on behind the scenes.
Are you aware of any program, and this is for any of you, from the SBA or from anyone else that that keeps people informed of what the current scams are and the current phishing expeditions and those things? Because quite frequently, people fall victim to something that has been used over and over. Is there anything that keeps people informed where they can go to one source and see that?
I know that that the IRS does release what they consider to be their dirty dozen, which are the top tax frauds that they're suspecting or they're seeing on any given year. And what I've seen, especially with a lot of the phishing and the phone calls, that's something that's really, initially some of the local news stations weren't all that keen on picking up on it, I believe, until they started to realize that even some of the people, the top people within the IRS were getting the same phone calls as you and I may be getting, saying that they're about ready to get arrested, or your wife's getting arrested, or the sheriff's coming to take your car. So they're getting those out, and now the news stations are broadcasting that the IRS doesn't make the phone calls. They're getting the word out, which is good, because they're, by getting it out on the news on that end, they're not using any of the budget that is constrained within the IRS at this time.
The gentleman's time's expired. Thank you. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And to the ranking member, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and to all the witnesses, thank you for I want to ask, would it make sense to coordinate cybersecurity efforts that are focused on small businesses through the SBA? My thought is that if business owners are more informed of computer security techniques and products to secure their networks, we may be able to help curtail some of these cyber attacks. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. I think that having coordination and a place where really truly detailed information about threats and what to do about them is put and made available to small businesses would be excellent. Mm-hmm.
Just as a comment onto that as well, one of the areas as far as coming out with too much of specifics as to what you need to do, you're then laying out the playing field for what the criminals need to do to get around your system. That was evident last, I guess, 2 years ago now, when the IRS released that no more than 3 refunds in a calendar year can go into a specific bank account. Through a lot of reverse engineering, they found out that if you start putting a 0 before the account number and a second 0 and a third 0, it was tricking the IRS systems, and the banks were disregarding it. So it's nice to have the education, but they need to be aware that too much specifics as to what you're doing or what you need to do, you're laying out a simple playing field for the bad guys to just circumvent.
I think consolidating information in a place like the SBA would be very helpful. I think Mr. Dunn had mentioned the FCC planning tool earlier, which is a good start, but that's an agency that has jurisdiction over telecommunications companies. I don't think a small retailer or other companies of that nature would be going to the FCC's website. I think you want to be able to have those resources in a place that folks are willing to call or to search for.
Sure, I think it would be a natural depository of information. They're already dealing with the agency, so and that's something that might make sense. Let's see. Unfortunately, even when consumers receive notification of a security breach, many of them do nothing about it or just don't know what to do and the next steps to remedy the breach. What should they do to protect themselves from increased risk of identity theft?
What I did is I've got a number of levels of security systems that I put in place. Number one, I have an external server provider that has a junk mail box, so anything that doesn't look accurate or looks not quite right, it goes directly into the junk mail. I have an internal system within my network in the building that also looks at that, and that has a separate junk mail file. So if it gets through the first level of protection, it then goes to the second level, at which point the user would have to override that junk mail from both levels. So that's one. I think going back to your other question, I think for me as a small business owner, consistency is very important. And as the other members mentioned, every state has a different jurisdiction. And for me as a small business owner, I have customers all over the world who come in. And if I were ever to be breached where their data was accessed, I'd have a number of different jurisdictions to go after and figure out what I need to do. And there's a tremendous cost in that.
I think to the point of defense in depth and not relying on any single point of failure, that's pretty key. So the concept of having several things that ultimately would have to be bypassed is typically the best approach instead of just having one particular thing.
I think one thing that your question raises is the fact that many Americans are receiving these breach notification letters, and they all give the same advice. Monitor your accounts, sign up for credit monitoring. And it seems like maybe a better way of getting at that is general consumer education, as opposed to forcing companies to send out these notifications where many of us receive them every week, every month, and doing it, I think, maybe a slightly different way that's more impactful for the consumers.
Yeah.
And finally, from a tax perspective, taxpayers, if they do receive one of these breach notifications and find out that they have been a victim of identity theft, they need to realize that not only reporting it to the three credit agencies, they should also file a specific form with the IRS, which would put them on notice that they were a victim, and that to be careful for a fraudulent tax return coming in from them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer, who's the vice chairman of this committee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Oldum, quick question for you. We've seen the cyber attacks come in all shapes and sizes and go after businesses of all shapes and sizes, including government agencies such as the NSA and Office of Personnel Management. While no one thinks that one size can fit all, shouldn't every business and government agency that handles highly sensitive data have some reasonable but also mandatory policy and procedure in place for securing data against loss or theft?
I think absolutely there should be policies in place that is standard and mandatory at any government agency that handles sensitive data.
It's kind of interesting. Mr. Snow talked about an insurance policy in place. Can you elaborate just a little bit, Mr. Snow, with regards to availability and cost of and coverages of insurance policies that are out there for cyber attacks? Does it account for your monetary loss or losses to your customers? Does it also cover the liability exposure that you may have to other customers that do business with you?
My understanding is it covers the notification mandates that are required around the country. So what would happen from my perspective is that I would notify the insurance company, and they would immediately come to my aid in terms of notifying all the customers that their data may have been breached, and also to provide that security to the individual that had the breach in terms of credit reporting and other things. That was my understanding. And that was the least expensive of the policies that are out there. There's a whole gamut of different insurance policies that you can get, I'm sure covering all the way up to the large liabilities. We have also, on top of that, an umbrella policy that we hope will cover what we feel. In our case, we have a $2 million liability policy. We hope that we will not exceed that in any particular breach, but it's an uncertain area.
Mr. Oldham, you advise people on the risks that they incur. So I would assume you've got a pretty good knowledge or extensive knowledge of the availability of these things and how far they go and the costs.
On insurance policies, I'm not an insurance lawyer, but that comes up in cases, and there's a wide range to the costs in general. It depends on the number of pieces of data, such as affected individuals. If I'm advising a client who has to give notifications in 30 different states, that's 30 different statutes that has to be reviewed to do that.
So it's basically a policy that's tailored to the individual risk?
Yeah, so there's, again, I'm not an insurance lawyer, but when these insurance policies do come up and we do have to look at them, there is a great variation. I'm not aware of a standard insurance policy, and I think, Mr. Snow, that's probably what your experience was that you were talking about. It's just the marketplace is so new at this point.
Yeah, well, it seems to me that that's a burgeoning area of need, obviously, and so we'll see how it develops. Along that line, Mr. Dunn, you mentioned a while ago that small businesses that do business with the government, is there a possibility of compromising government information with those businesses, and therefore they are exposed for a liability situation? Is there something in the contract there that protects them, or they need to be covering a risk there? How does that work?
I mean, I don't know necessarily about a contractual obligation. I think from the perspective of interconnecting systems or share of data, there is a liability in either direction. If an attacker was to gain access to a small business that services a government client, the assumption is that either the value of the data or some direct connectivity to the government agency may exist.
So we got an exposure there you need to be careful of, right? As a business, you're going to have some sort of, I would think, an insurance policy or some bond of some kind that would protect you in case something went wrong.
I think the whole area of cybersecurity insurance is quite new, fairly immature.
Yeah.
I don't know an awful lot about it, but I often wonder what do you have to do in order to be insurable, and how do you stay insurable? And that may have some kind of compliance or regulatory kind of check.
I've always thought that the insurance companies are going to drive this issue because at some point they're the ones that are going to have to insure the issue, and therefore they're going to demand certain standards, and when those standards are out there, they're going to be the ones driving how this is all done. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Hanna, who is the chairman of Subcommittee on Contracting and Workforce, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I want to just talk about a bill. Mr. Payne actually mentioned it inadvertently. I'm co-authored with Derek Kilmer from Washington. It's the Improving Small Business Cybersecurity Act of 2016. We have 900 small business development agencies around the country, right? This bill, which would cost, we estimate, almost nothing, would authorize and change the Small Business Act and direct these SBDCs to offer cyber support services to small businesses, again, at no additional cost. We would simply be leveraging the SBDC's cyber support services. DHS and Department of Homeland Security and Small Business Administration would simply be required to review current federal programs and develop, along with the SBDC, a cybersecurity strategy to help in all the communities throughout the country. I want to ask you a question, Mr. Dunn, and anyone who wants to weigh in. It sounds like this problem is, at the very least, a moving target. And it's not just a moving target, it's an intellectually moving target, right? It is a one-upsmanship. It's a constant game, cat and mouse type of thing. You mentioned in your statement, Mr. Dunn, and I apologize for being late to this hearing, that training needs to be offered, but it tends to be too general. Is it a practical thing to talk to a small business person who may have, a small business can be one or two people and still have enormous impact potential against them? Is it practical in today's world to ask a person to be up to speed in the way they need to be, not just today, but going forward. How do you manage that kind of, Mr. Oldham, anybody interested in answering that?
Well, I mean, I think that the concept is that giving them specific advice on the things that really matter to them. So if the example is perhaps they want to offset their email services to a cloud provider, telling them specifically the settings that would be useful to turn on and the benefits for that, I think is better than just telling them about general awareness concepts about the dangers of email, for example. I think that also striving for this education around data as being the factor that you consider the most, you don't have to be up on all of the security concepts that currently are happening, but you do have to understand what data you have, the value of it, and then what you should do based on the different value of different data that you have.
So in your sense of that, Mr. Oldham, anyone, do you think it is practical to do certain minimal things that help people broadly to limit the possibility of an attack? Mr. Oldham?
Yeah, I think when you step back to the risk management aspect and not just to the zeros and ones, it's very important, as Mr. Dunn said, to focus on what the issue is, and that's usually driven by the types of data. Certain data is more sensitive than other data. And providing high-level guidance that says cybersecurity is important, you should have good cybersecurity, isn't helpful to small businesses. It's providing targeted advice that is practical and granular to their specific situation.
So these small business development centers around the country, the 900, it would be possible for them to establish basic format that would help the majority of small businesses out there without a lot of not making it too complicated, difficult, and that would be helpful.
I think it would be helpful as long as they have the right expertise that's going into providing that guidance. I mean, one of the issues that happens in this space is guidance gets put out, but it doesn't evolve with the threat. I think that's one of the big top-level messages is this threat evolves rapidly, and so does the legal requirements. And
So if the small business development centers were able to do this, they could be a source in that community that was updating it rather than randomly so many different small businesses trying to do it on their own and maybe not being entirely effective in that.
That sounds very promising, yes.
Well, thank you. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. I want to thank our witnesses for being with us here today. They've helped clarify just how vulnerable many small businesses and individuals are to cyber attacks. It's a growing and evolving problem, and you've helped shed some light on what should be done to combat it. And for that, we very much thank you. And I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. And without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.